Hey guys, tonight we're rolling back the clock to a chapter of American history that's hazier than your uncle's garage at a Pink Floyd reunion. The strange history of how America criminalized weed. That's right, marijuana, Mary Jane, jazz cabbage, devil's lettuce, whatever you call it. Tonight we're getting cozy and following its tragic, comic and occasionally paranoid journey from farm fields to felony. But first, before you drift off into this cloud of historical absurdity, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and, more importantly, whether you've ever had to explain to your mom what a vape pen is. Bonus points if she asked if it was for the pot. Now, dim the lights, put on a fan for that gentle breeze, sink into your most questionable sweatpants, and let's get comfortable. But just imagine, have you ever wondered what it would feel like to wake up in an era when politicians thought jazz music could make you rob a shoe store? Or when your neighbour's suspicious tomato plant could send you to jail? Did people really believe that a single puff could turn you into a jazz-crazed maniac? What did an anti-marijuana rally actually look like? And did anyone bring snacks? What was it like to be a doctor in the 1920s, writing a prescription for cannabis extract right before dinner, only to have that become a felony by breakfast? Could you survive a day in the life of a 1930s hemp farmer, dodging federal agents and reefer madness? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in America, but it's 1910, and your garden is about to get you in a lot more trouble than dandelions. Good luck. Before weed became a four-letter word at Thanksgiving, it was just another crop. You're waking up on a sunny 1910 morning, walking past fields of industrial hemp taller than you are, destined for rope, paper, and possibly your uncle's suspiciously sturdy overalls. Nobody bats an eye yet. You stretch beneath a patched cotton sheet, sunlight filtering through your window in lazy golden bands. The smell of dew and fresh-cut grass floats in on a gentle breeze, mixing with the earthy musk of hemp. You shuffle to the kitchen, where your aunt is making coffee the colour of mud, and someone is already talking about the price of rope, like it's the most exciting news since the cow learned to open the gate by herself. Breakfast is oatmeal and a chunk of yesterday's bread, served with the sort of unhurried silence that only exists in households where everyone is always tired. The family conversation drifts, inevitably, to the fields. Gonna be a good hemp harvest, your uncle says, already halfway out the door in boots that look suspiciously homegrown. Out here, hemp isn't just a plant. It's the background noise of your entire life, a scratchy green wall against the horizon, waving in the breeze like it knows something you don't. You step outside and blink at the sight, row after row of hemp, stretching down the gentle slope of the farm, leaves fanned out like nature's awkward jazz hands. It's not glamorous. You're not standing in a swirling haze of forbidden smoke. You're just surrounded by plants so sturdy they make corn look like a nervous houseplant. In 1910, nobody's panicking about reefer madness. In fact, nobody's panicking about much at all, except maybe whether the barn roof will survive another rainstorm. The work is honest, but unending. You grab a scythe, because out here everyone over the age of 5 gets a scythe, and begin cutting stalks taller than most people's ambitions. The hemp is scratchy, fibrous, and determined to leave little green splinters in your arms. There's a rhythmic sound to the cutting, swish, thunk, drag, repeat. A steady, mind-numbing music that pairs nicely with the occasional shout from your cousin about who's slacking off and why. Hemp, it turns out, is America's multi-tool. Today it'll be roped and baled for shipment to the Navy, maybe spun into sails, maybe into twine for packages, maybe into those overalls your uncle swears by. Next week some of it will be pulped into paper, and if the rumours are true, a little will end up in a batch of hemp soap that's about as gentle as sandpaper, but twice as effective. You wonder if someday someone will make hemp toilet paper, but quickly banish the thought as too ambitious for a Monday. Nobody's worried about the law. The sheriff sometimes wanders by and tips his hat, asking about the weather, never the crops. The county fair even gives a prize for the tallest hemp stalk, which your cousin claims he won by singing to it every morning. It's hard to say whether that's true, but you're pretty sure he can't carry a tune, so the plant probably thrived out of pure survival instinct. The days run together, sun up to sun down, following the same gentle routine. Cut, haul, stack, repeat. At night, You collapse into bed with the faint itch of hemp fibers clinging to your clothes, drifting off to the smell of earth and the distant sound of frogs pretending they're much larger than they actually are. You can't imagine a world where this plant would get anyone in trouble, where growing hemp could lead to court dates or midnight raids, or where your uncle's overalls might someday be considered contraband. For now, you just hope tomorrow is sunny and the harvest is good. Because here in the fields of old America, hemp is just another part of life, reliable, unremarkable, and absolutely everywhere. The real madness would be imagining it any other way. It's the roaring 1910s and your medicine cabinet looks like a party. Cannabis extract for your nerves, cough syrup with a dash of morphine, and a mysterious tonic that invigorates the blood. You take a swig and hope it cures at least one of your many Victorian anxieties. You wake up with a headache, the kind only caused by questionable wallpaper and relatives visiting from out of town. You shuffle over to the bathroom, a grand term for a room containing a jug, a bowl, and optimism, and open the medicine cabinet. It's packed tighter than a travelling circus wagon. Tiny glass vials gleam under a thin layer of dust, each one promising something miraculous. Here's Dr. Anderson's elixir of life, which smells suspiciously like gin. There's Aunt Gertrude's patent nerve drops, guaranteed to restore vim, or possibly your lost childhood. And then, of course, the most fashionable bottle of the bunch, a tiny, respectable-looking tincture of cannabis indica. You read the label out loud because everything in this era comes with a poem and a warning. For relief of nervous exhaustion, sleeplessness, melancholy, and general malaise. You pause and try to figure out if you have all those things. Probably. Everyone you know is vaguely exhausted, occasionally melancholy, and always one step away from a fainting couch. You tip a few drops into your tea, swirl it around, and listen to the soft clink of glass. A soothing sound, if you ignore the morphine-laced cough syrup grinning at you from the top shelf. Your family doctor has the handwriting of a medieval monk and the prescription habits of a carnival barker. If you have a cough, he prescribes laudanum. For aches, there's the ever-popular soothing syrup, which is mostly alcohol and hope. If you're especially unlucky, he'll hand you a bottle with no label at all. Just a cheerful, try this, let me know if you feel less dreadful. In the world of patent medicine, you're always on the edge of a medical breakthrough or a 3-day nap. You venture out to the local pharmacy, where the display window is a shrine to the miracles of chemistry. Rows of bottles in blue, green and amber promise to fix every ill known to humankind, as well as some problems that sound suspiciously made up. Are you suffering from liver torpor? Is your spleen lackluster? Does your blood need invigorating, the signs ask, as if your internal organs are hosting a sulky Victorian tea party. For everything else, there's a marvellous new cannabis extract, which, according to the enthusiastic sign, is suitable for children, adults, and even the family pet in moderation. Inside, the pharmacist wears a bow tie and the haunted look of a man who has seen too many tinctures. He slides your usual order across the counter with a practiced flourish, barely glancing up from his register. The cannabis extract comes in a tiny brown bottle, nestled among remedies for gout, hysteria, and excessive flatulence. There's an unspoken understanding. Nobody asks what's in the medicine, and nobody really cares, as long as it works or at least tastes better than boiled cabbage. The truth is, nobody's too worried about side effects. Everyone trusts the labels, even though most are written in a font designed to hide the words may contain cocaine. You meet friends at the soda fountain sipping Coca-Cola for your nerves, blissfully unaware it once contained more stimulants than a jazz club in 1922. Even your neighbour's baby is rumoured to sleep through the night thanks to a little Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, which on closer inspection could probably sedate a circus elephant. Back at home, you line your bottles up on the windowsill. The sun gleams off the cannabis tincture, the morphine cough syrup, and the blood invigorator that tastes oddly like licorice and regret. You sigh, feeling that special 1910s comfort of knowing that whatever ails you, someone somewhere has bottled a solution, wrapped it in poetry and sold it for 25 cents. The world will change soon. Regulations are coming. Labels will start listing ingredients instead of just dreams and desperate hope. But for now, as you drift off to sleep on your creaky mattress, heart thumping gently from a heady blend of tinctures, you can rest easy. Because in the age of patent medicine, relief is just a swig away, even if nobody's entirely sure what it is you're actually drinking. Suddenly there's a new word in town, marijuana, thanks to waves of Mexican immigrants fleeing revolution. The newspapers start whispering, and now every time someone smells something skunky, they wonder if Pancho Villa is in their backyard. You wake up to the sound of a neighbour's rooster, which seems to have confused dawn with absolutely any time it feels like it. You shuffle to the porch, where the air is heavy with the promise of change. It's the early 1910s, and your town, once sleepy and predictable, is alive with new faces, new foods, and for some reason, a lot of stories about a horse named Lightning. At the local cafe, talk has shifted from wheat prices and barn repairs to those folks from the border and a mysterious plant called marijuana. As you pass the bakery, you overhear two old-timers arguing about whether marijuana is a kind of tobacco, a type of wild lettuce, or possibly something more sinister. They've read stories, always in the more dramatic newspapers, that claim it's a devilish herb smuggled over in saddlebags, potent enough to drive a grown man wild, or at least mildly interested in jazz. One of them claims he saw Pancho Villa himself riding past the train station, tossing seeds out like a very confused Johnny Appleseed. Your own introduction to marijuana comes at the town square, where a travelling vendor with a moustache that belongs in an opera is selling hand-rolled cigarettes and spicy tamales. The air is thick with music and the smell of something sharp and green. He smiles, shrugs, and offers you a smoke. Relaxing, he says, in the way people describe things that are both mysterious and possibly illegal. At the next table, local children stare wide-eyed as a mariachi band tunes up. Their parents shuffle nervously, casting glances at the sheriff, who is now reading a pamphlet titled 10 Ways to Spot the Marijuana Menace. Tip number 1, is someone laughing? Tip number 2, are they playing the guitar? Tip number 3, do they seem generally more relaxed than you are? If so, beware. The newspapers, never ones to let facts get in the way of a good scare, are running wild with headlines. Reefer rascals roam the railroad, marijuana madness in the milk bar. You imagine a world where the worst thing about your neighbour is that his chili is too spicy, or his music a little too loud, but now the town gossip chain is on high alert for anything that smells skunky. There are whispers about wild-eyed outsiders and crazed musicians, as if every new arrival is secretly an agent of chaos, armed with nothing but a banjo and a suspiciously relaxed attitude. Of course, the truth is far less dramatic. The Mexican families settling here are bringing not only new crops and labour, but also recipes, celebrations, and yes, the occasional rolled leaf for relaxing after work. In reality, the town's greatest risk is a spontaneous fiesta, and maybe running out of tortillas. But paranoia is a hearty American weed, and it grows fast. You start to notice new signs at the general store. No loitering, no loafing, no marijuana, which raises more questions than answers. At night you sit on your porch listening to the distant sound of laughter, music, and, somewhere, a harmonica playing a tune that makes your feet tap under the table. You wonder what all the fuss is about. You've never seen anyone go wild, other than that time old man Wilkins tried to race the mayor's mule after 3 lemonades. The world is changing, your town is changing, and a single new word, marijuana, seems to carry all the hope, worry and confusion of the new century. Some people will cling to their suspicion, others will just shrug and pass the tamales. For now, you breathe in the summer air which is tinged with possibility and yes, maybe a hint of something skunky. But you're pretty sure Pancho Villa isn't hiding in your backyard, unless he's after your tomatoes. You close your eyes, wondering what tomorrow's headline will be. Probably something about wild lettuce. It's always something. You're in a smoky jazz club in 1920s New Orleans. Saxophones wail, dancers spin, and somewhere in the shadows a lawman in a comically oversized hat pretends to ignore the joint passing under the table just so he can keep listening to the music a little longer. It's midnight, and the club pulses with life. The velvet-draped room is half shadows, half golden lamplight, and all energy. The crowd sways in slow motion, hypnotized by the rolling piano and the sweet, heavy air laced with perfume, sweat, and something far earthier. Someone laughs a little too loud in the corner, while at the bar a trumpet player argues with a bartender over whether moonshine can technically be called a mixer. You slide into a sticky leather booth, careful to avoid last night's mystery stain, and find yourself sandwiched between a trumpet case and a man named Gus, whose sole job appears to be snapping his fingers off beat. He offers you a hand-rolled cigarette with a wink. You glance at the label, there isn't one. But here, nobody asks. The club's rhythm is its own law. Outside, the world is gripped by prohibition. Alcohol is a crime, morality squads roam the streets, and politicians give long-winded speeches about protecting America from moral decay, usually just before ducking into their favourite speakeasy. But inside this club, the rules blur. The music is hot, the drinks are lukewarm, and every table seems to be hiding at least one minor misdemeanor. The joint makes its way around your table with the quiet confidence of a jazz solo, unhurried and unpredictable. It's wrapped in brown paper and optimism, sparking the occasional cough and the kind of conversation that wanders off in 5 directions at once. Next to you, a woman with a feathered headband explains that weed makes the music taste brighter. You believe her, partly because you're a little lightheaded and partly because she just bought the band another round. In the corner, the lawman's hat seems to grow by the minute. He's half-heartedly scanning the room, notebook open, eyes closed in time to the sax. Technically, he's here to enforce the law, but what law exactly? The marijuana menace is just beginning to show up in the local papers, usually spelled 3 different ways and described as everything from a gateway to madness to a mild inconvenience for people who can't keep track of their own shoes. The musicians, meanwhile, aren't worried. They know the secret. Music and marijuana have been partners long before the headlines caught up. The club's regulars joke that the only real crime here is missing a beat, or letting your joint burn out before the chorus. It's an open secret, and the lawman in the corner, who requests Sweet Georgia Brown with suspicious regularity, doesn't seem eager to arrest the fun, at least not before the 3rd set. As the night wears on, the line between legal and illegal grows as wobbly as the dancers. You watch as a couple in matching suspenders slow dance past the lawman, one tucking a joint behind her ear like a lucky charm. The bartender polishes a glass, looks at the clock and shrugs. If the sheriff asks, I'm just selling ginger ale, he whispers, pouring something the colour of moonlight into your glass. You close your eyes and let the sounds blend together, clinking glasses, hushed laughter, the lazy roll of a bass. For a moment, the world feels easy. Here, weed isn't a crime. It's just part of the atmosphere. Another note in the music, another joke between friends. The real menace is the possibility that the music might stop, or the lawman might finally stand up and remember why he's here. But tonight, he stays seated. The band plays on. The joint circles back, and you, swaying gently in your seat, realize that sometimes history's loudest changes begin in the hush of a smoky room, with a melody, a smile, and a secret nobody's really keeping. It's 1936. A new government film warns that one puff will turn your teenager into a howling lunatic. You're sitting in a crowded school auditorium, trying not to laugh as the actors clutch their heads and dive through plate glass windows. The lights dim, and the film sputters to life, flickering in black and white. On screen, a mild-mannered paper boy accepts a suspiciously long cigarette from a man in a hat you could use as a canoe. Within minutes, he's in a jazz den, eyes wild, frantically pounding a piano and shrieking about the giggles. His girlfriend tries to stop him, but instead is overcome by the irresistible urge to dance the Charleston on top of a table. The audience, your classmates, a couple of stone-faced teachers, and one kid whose parents run the local pharmacy, sits transfixed, torn between horror, confusion, and the overwhelming need to giggle themselves. Every scene is more dramatic than the last. A student tries a reefer and immediately forgets his algebra, which, to be fair, happens to most people without any chemical help. Mothers faint in the kitchen as newspapers scream about the marijuana menace. One unfortunate soul eats an entire box of donuts and then attempts to wrestle a coat rack, convinced it's a gangster in disguise. You can hear whispers around you. Is that what weed does? Should we all be worried about our coat racks now? You glance at the teachers, whose faces are frozen between concern and disbelief. One clutches a handout titled, "Is your child a jazz addict?" The principal, never one to miss an opportunity, announces that there will be no tolerance for giggling, jazz, or any plant that smells funny. You wonder if he realizes he's talking about half the county's front lawns. Outside the auditorium, posters have popped up overnight. They're dramatic, with wide-eyed teens and sinister shadows looming in the background. "Real madness," they shout, promising that one puff will lead to a life of crime, unemployment, and possibly banjo solos. The local hardware store gets in on the action, advertising safe gardening supplies, guaranteed marijuana-free. You picture a pitchfork wielded in defense against the oncoming hordes of jazz-crazed lettuce. At home, your parents sit you down for the talk. Not about the birds and the bees, but about the weeds and the lunatics. Your mother, clutching a government pamphlet, tells you that good children say no to reefer. Your father wonders aloud if hemp rope is now a gateway crime. The family dog eyes you suspiciously, perhaps recalling the time you tried to teach him jazz hands. In town, the movie theatre hosts a special parents-only screening of Reefer Madness, followed by a Q&A with the local sheriff and a doctor who admits he's never actually seen a marijuana plant, but he's pretty sure it looks like a haunted fern. The town gossip mill kicks into overdrive. Someone claims their cousin's neighbour's milkman tried weed once and now only eats soup with a fork. Stories grow taller with every telling. It's not just movies and posters. The local radio crackles with warnings, school assemblies morph into morality plays, and a new breed of concerned citizen emerges, clutching binoculars and peering suspiciously into every vegetable patch. Suddenly, tomato plants are under surveillance, and anyone humming a jazz tune is met with narrow-eyed suspicion. You begin to realise that reefer madness isn't really about the plant at all. It's about fear, the kind that grows best in the dark, watered by rumours and official-sounding nonsense. The film ends, the lights come up, and you step out into the daylight, blinking at a world that suddenly feels a lot more anxious and a lot less rational. But as you walk home, you can't help but think, if danger really sounded like jazz and smelled like the neighbour's garden, maybe the world would be a more interesting place. For now, you'll just keep your coat rack close, just in case. Meet Harry Anslinger, the J. Edgar Hoover of hemp. He's convinced that marijuana is a gateway to jazz, crime, and possibly spontaneous dance battles. He's got a desk full of headlines, a vendetta against musicians, and a very creative imagination. You're sitting in a 1930s government office, the air thick with cigarette smoke, government stationery, and the kind of paperwork that can only exist in a country that believes every problem can be solved with more paperwork. At the head of it all sits Harry Anslinger, a man who manages to look both bored and outraged at the same time. His suit is pressed, his moustache is tense, and his brow is furrowed by the weight of imaginary crime waves. The radio hums softly in the corner, interrupted every so often by a jazzy riff that makes him wince as if he's just tasted sour milk. Harry doesn't trust jazz. He doesn't trust musicians. He certainly doesn't trust anything that smells vaguely herbal and makes people tap their feet. In his mind, America is teetering on the brink of collapse, held back only by his unrelenting campaign against what he likes to call the devil's lettuce. To him, the nation is under siege, from saxophonists, from teenagers with new ideas, and from the creeping threat of recreational happiness. He flips through his ever-growing collection of newspaper clippings: marijuana maniac robs bank, reefer fiend bites dog, jazz music linked to unruly hips. Each headline is underlined in red, annotated in the margins with urgent, exclamation point heavy notes. You watch as he drafts another stern letter to Congress, warning that unless decisive action is taken, the next generation will all be jazz musicians, criminals, or, worst of all, slightly relaxed. Harry's crusade is part bureaucracy, part theatre. He's a master of the dramatic press release, the late-night radio warning, and the testimony that strings together anecdotes like pearls of panic. Under his watch, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics is less a scientific institution and more an improv troupe specialising in cautionary tales. He testifies before Congress with the gravitas of a doomsday prophet, spinning tales of jazz parties gone wrong, mothers ruined by marijuana cigarettes, and a country one puff away from anarchy. No detail is too small for Harry. He obsesses over music lyrics, police reports, and medical journals, though, conveniently, only the parts that agree with him. His favourite pastime is blaming everything on weed: crime, unemployment, unwed pregnancies, the neighbour's loud parrot. If you brought him your problems, he'd probably prescribe a tax stamp, a new law, or a well-timed headline. Anslinger's favourite target? Musicians, especially the jazz and blues greats who, to his mind, were both cultural revolutionaries and public enemies. He blacklists them, chases them across state lines, and peppers his reports with dark warnings about satanic syncopation. He is personally offended by improvisation. Louis Armstrong? Suspicious. Billie Holiday? Dangerous. A teenager humming in a drugstore? Probably high. Anslinger sees culture as a slippery slope, and at the bottom of it is always a jazz band. You watch as Harry's office becomes a nerve centre for the national paranoia. His letters influence Congress. His headlines stoke fears. His speeches feed a media frenzy that's less about facts and more about feelings, specifically the feeling that someone somewhere is having too much fun. Under Harry's leadership, America learns to fear its own shadow, especially if the shadow is dancing. The true genius of Anslinger's campaign isn't in the facts, because those are a bit thin, but in his relentless commitment to a story. He spins a web so tight that by the end, nobody can remember whether the danger was real or just very, very loud. Marijuana goes from an afterthought to a national crisis, not because of evidence, but because one man in a press suit wouldn't stop talking about it. You leave his office with a headache and the strange urge to listen to jazz, grateful you don't have to live in a world where your hobbies might be declared a national emergency before breakfast. But if you ever get caught humming a tune, just hope Harry's not listening. You're an editor at a 1930s tabloid, and your boss, William Randolph Hearst, just declared war on marijuana. Your assignment? Find a story, any story, about a crazed dope fiend, bonus points if they play the trombone. You start your morning by dodging a pile of headline drafts. Reefer makes teens dance like lunatics. Marijuana menace in milk bar. Jazz cat robs pie shop. Authorities baffled. The newsroom is a swirling cyclone of clacking typewriters, cigarette smoke, and editors nervously clutching coffee mugs that haven't been washed since Calvin Coolidge left office. Hearst's memo is still pinned to the bulletin board in bright red ink. Marijuana is the real enemy. More scare, less care. Your desk is already buried in letters from concerned citizens who swear their neighbours' tomatoes are getting shifty, and the local jazz club is a front for international lettuce smuggling. Every journalist in the building is scrambling for the next big scare. The competition is fierce. First one to find a trombone-wielding fiend gets the lead story, and if they're lucky, a raise of exactly 23 cents. Your lead reporter returns from an undercover operation at the city park with little more than grass stains and an odd story about a squirrel with a peculiar limp. Is it news? You ask. Did the squirrel seem unusually relaxed? He shrugs. You jot it down anyway. Never know when a rodent angle might come in handy. In the absence of facts, you embrace creativity. This is journalism, 1930s style. The less you know, the more you speculate. Today's assignment. Weave together a cautionary tale involving a mysterious plant, a missing bicycle, and a jazz musician named Lefty who claims he once played trumpet so hard it stopped traffic. You grab your hat and trench coat determined to investigate, which mostly means hanging around diners eavesdropping on teenagers who complain about school and the taste of cafeteria meatloaf. Any mention of jazz, hemp, or trombones? Not really. But there's a promising rumour that the high school marching band is up to something. Back at the office, Hearst storms through the newsroom like a man searching for lost change. "We need outrage," he bellows. "Where's my front-page menace?" You hand him a draft about a marijuana-crazed trombonist who played a solo so wild it frightened a local poodle. He grins and slaps the headline on the wall. Poodle survives reefer rhapsody. The presses roll, the public devours every word, and suddenly marijuana isn't just a funny-sounding foreign weed, it's the root of all chaos, at least until the next fad comes along. The newsroom receives tips about everything from haunted lettuce to jazz-fueled bakery robberies. You publish them all. Tomorrow you're sure someone will write in about a daisy with suspicious motives. Hearst's empire thrives on this chaos. The real goal isn't the truth. It's circulation, scandal, and the unquenchable thirst for a new villain. Marijuana, with its weird spelling and jazz associations, is the perfect scapegoat. It doesn't help that the word sounds just exotic enough to unsettle your readers' grandparents. It's a goldmine for tabloids, and you, humble editor, are shoveling as fast as you can. By sunset, the newsroom is flush with absurdity. You assign a columnist to cover marijuana and the modern house cat. Is your kitty high? Another piece investigates the tragic fate of a trombone player who misplaced his sheet music and blames reefer fog. By now, you're fairly certain half the news is invented, and the other half is just jazz musicians making fun of you. You end your day by filing tomorrow's draft. Local grandma bakes brownies, hysteria ensues. You lean back, satisfied. In a world where news and nonsense are printed on the same page, your only real crime is running out of ink. And if you're lucky, nobody will ever realise that the only truly high thing in this newsroom is the stack of headlines. Doctors are writing cannabis prescriptions for everything from headaches to hysteria. Patients leave the pharmacy with tiny bottles labelled cannabis indica, blissfully unaware that their medicine will soon be more illegal than moonshine. It's the early 20th century, and your biggest worry is whether the pharmacist remembered to set aside your favourite remedy, cannabis tincture number 4, a magical elixir with a label that promises relief from everything, except, perhaps, your cousin's accordion playing. The apothecary smells like dust, licorice, and optimism. Bottles line the shelves in rainbow hues, some promising vigour, others tranquility, and a few that claim to fix nerves, digestion, and probably the family dog's disposition if you're not careful. The bell jingles as you walk in, and the pharmacist, resplendent in his white coat and bristling moustache, nods knowingly. "Rough week?" he asks, already reaching for the brown glass bottle you didn't have to ask for. "It's good for what ails you. Headaches, sleeplessness, irritability, marital tension, existential dread." The list trails off as he counts out the drops into a little blue vial. "Take 2 after supper," he advises, or 3 if the in-laws are visiting. Around you, a mother waits with her fidgety child, hoping the cannabis cordial will calm his night terrors. At the counter, a man with a bad knee picks up a jar of ointment that lists Indian hemp as the main ingredient. The local schoolteacher swears by the cannabis cough syrup, which she claims makes her lessons far more tolerable. Nobody raises an eyebrow. In fact, half the town is on a first-name basis with Miss Mary Jane, as one elderly customer affectionately calls her bottle. You scan the counter and see advertisements for lozenges, elixirs and candies infused with cannabis. Relieves toothache, soothes nerves, restores good humour. There's even a Lydia Pinkham's compound promising to support female health, with the help of our leafy green friend. The language is poetic, if not entirely scientific. If you're having a rough day, just pop into the pharmacy and leave with a solution in your pocket and a spring in your step. The only thing to worry about is mixing up your nerve drops with the cat's flea tonic. There are no lectures, no side-eye glances, no crime dramas about cannabis. Instead, the biggest scandal is someone sneaking an extra spoonful of relaxing syrup before bed. Your family doctor is on board. He's the one who prescribed the stuff after all. When the medicine runs low, you don't panic. You just walk down to the corner, hand over a nickel, and chat about the weather while the pharmacist weighs out your monthly dose. Nobody suspects this ordinary ritual is about to vanish. Rumours float in from the city, something about new laws, dangerous drugs, and worries that sound more like political theatre than medical advice. Still, the idea that cannabis could become a forbidden substance seems as absurd as banning baking powder. After all, it's just another tool in the doctor's bag, next to leeches and suspiciously fizzy nerve powders. The world feels stable, if not entirely modern. Your aches and anxieties can be measured by the dropperful. Then, slowly, everything shifts. The bottles disappear from the shelves one by one. The pharmacist starts talking in whispers, shaking his head at the new rules from Washington. "Can't sell you that anymore," he says, apologetic but firm. The labels get plainer, then vanish altogether. Your doctor, always the professional, starts writing prescriptions for new, improved remedies with far less poetry and absolutely none of the old comfort. You hold on to your last little bottle of cannabis tincture, tucked away in the back of a drawer, a relic of a gentler era when medicine came in sweet, syrupy spoonfuls. In a few years, you'll read headlines about reefer madness and marijuana fiends, and you'll shake your head, wondering how something so ordinary could become so notorious. But for now, you savour the simplicity. A pharmacy filled with quiet hope, a doctor's note written in looping script, and a medicine cabinet that, just for a little while longer, makes the world feel a little less overwhelming. World War II hits, and suddenly the government begs farmers to grow hemp again, for rope, uniforms, and ship rigging. You're watching old Hemp for Victory propaganda films, wondering how the devil's lettuce became a national hero for 5 whole minutes. The lights in the local movie house flicker, and there it is on the silver screen. Patriotic music, stoic farmers, and fields of hemp waving in the breeze like a very enthusiastic flag. A narrator, whose voice sounds suspiciously like the man who did toothpaste ads last week, insists that hemp is essential to the war effort. You glance at your neighbour, who was lectured about reefer madness last year, and he's now nodding solemnly at the glories of rope. Outside, the world is suddenly upside down. Only a few years ago, growing hemp could land you in serious trouble. Now, the government can't print seed catalogues fast enough. County agents hand out pamphlets explaining the virtues of hemp. It's strong, fast-growing, and most importantly, not just for people with jazz records and mysterious coughs. Everyone is reminded that this is industrial hemp, which is absolutely, definitely, not for recreational use. Unless you want to try and smoke a rope, you don't. Your uncle, who swore off farming after the Great Depression, is suddenly a hemp patriot. He dusts off the old tractor, polishes his overalls, and announces that he's doing his duty for the country, one stalk at a time. The barn is quickly repurposed into a drying shed, filled with hemp leaves hanging from the rafters like a very green, very ambitious Christmas display. The dog develops a suspicious fondness for rolling in the hemp piles, but you figure even he knows which way the wind is blowing. The propaganda films make it look so easy. "Grow hemp for victory," they shout as heroic music swells and a boy in a cap ties a ship to a dock with a hemp rope the size of a python. School children are drafted into the cause, quizzed on the difference between hemp and marijuana, a pop quiz no one saw coming. The local postmaster is suddenly an expert on fiber crops, offering unsolicited advice on optimal planting depth, with the authority of a man who's never seen a weed in his life. Harvest season turns into a patriotic spectacle. The town's social calendar fills up with hemp days, where people gather to eat questionable casseroles, watch the mayor cut a ceremonial stalk, and sing newly written songs about good old American rope. Nobody mentions that just a few months ago, hemp was lumped in with all sorts of supposed ne'er-do-well activities. Now it's the toast of the town, a Cinderella story, but with more chafing. If you're a farmer, you learn to roll with the contradictions. You spend the morning at a government office filling out forms that remind you not to misuse your hemp crop, and the afternoon listening to radio reports about secret Axis plots to sabotage America's rope supply. There's even a rumour that spies are hiding in haystacks, which mostly results in children poking pitchforks at random piles in search of excitement. The war surges on, and for a brief shining moment, hemp is everywhere, on posters, in parades, in the suddenly proud fields outside of town. The crop saves ships, binds cargo, and even appears in uniforms, all while managing to remain not quite a crime. For 5 glorious minutes, the devil's lettuce is the hero America didn't know it needed. Then the war ends. The government quietly changes its mind. The patriotic posters come down, the film reels are boxed up, and the farmers are politely informed that their services are no longer required. Your uncle, now a veteran of both farming and government whiplash, sighs, pats his dog and plants tomatoes. You watch the last Hemp for Victory film for old time's sake, marvelling at how quickly a villain can become a hero, and back again. Only in America, you think, can a plant go from outlaw to war hero, and back to outlaw before you've even finished your popcorn. Open a 1900s newspaper and find glossy ads for Dr. Smith's cannabis oil. It's good for everything except, apparently, keeping you out of jail by 1940. You sit down with your morning coffee, flip open the Sunday paper, and before you even get to the crosswords, you're bombarded by promises from a kaleidoscope of miracle cures. Dr. Wainwright's nerve elixir, Madame Blanche's soothing syrup. And there, in a proud block print bordered by fake laurel leaves, is the latest, Dr. Smith's cannabis oil, a boon for mankind. A drawing of a smiling lady rides a bicycle with the stamina of a Tour de France champion, her hair flowing, her teeth improbably perfect for someone living in an age before fluoride. The ad lists every ailment under the sun: headaches, sleeplessness, melancholy, arthritis, general crankiness, and something mysteriously called female troubles. You scan the fine print for a list of side effects and find only a poetic assurance that all discomforts shall be banished, and the spirit restored to its rightful glow. There's a coupon, save 2 cents if you cut it out with a pair of scissors, and a strong sense of hope. You can't help but marvel at the confidence of these early ad men. They toss around words like invigorating, restorative, and guaranteed to soothe the mind. One promises to banish the blues. Another assures you that cannabis oil is as safe as mother's lullaby. The artwork shows a robust family gathered around the dinner table, beaming with the vague but unmistakable satisfaction of people who are definitely on something. At the pharmacy, the counter is crowded with bright tins and little glass bottles. The pharmacist stands ready, white coat gleaming, armed with a knowledge of Latin names and very few regulations. The shelves are a museum of wonders: cannabis lozenges, herbal caramels, and tonics designed to give you pep, zip, and vim, whatever those are. You begin to wonder if pep and vim are actual ingredients or just side effects. Children aren't left out either. In fact, half the ads seem to be targeting mothers of fretful toddlers. Calms the baby, brightens the mother, proclaims one cheerful sign. A cartoon child sleeps soundly under a quilt, while her mother sips a mug of cannabis tea, both wearing the serene expressions of people who will not remember a thing about this evening. Of course, with every new medicine comes a new celebrity endorsement. In 1905, if you weren't selling your own brand of cough syrup, were you really even famous? Politicians, actors, and a suspiciously large number of mustachioed men with monocles all appear in the testimonials. "I recommend Dr. Smith's cannabis oil to all my constituents," declares one local alderman. "Now I get through council meetings with a smile and nary a care." The dark twist, of course, is looming in the future. By the 1930s, new laws will start creeping in. Those cheery ads, once the pride of page 3, quietly disappear. The smiling bicyclist is replaced by stern warnings. Cannabis, a national menace. Headlines begin to appear as if your mother's soothing syrup has suddenly turned into a gateway to jazz-fueled chaos. Still, here in the bright ad-filled world of the early 1900s, cannabis is just another tool in the cabinet. If you can't sleep, if your knees ache, or if you simply want to face your relatives with something stronger than determination, you pour a spoonful, close your eyes, and trust the smiling faces in the paper. The only real hazard? By the time you finish your bottle, the law might have changed, the ad men have moved on to the next miracle cure, and you're left with an empty vial, a lingering sense of calm, and the sneaking suspicion that the world, for a little while, was just a touch more magical when everything was guaranteed or your money back. It's the 1930s, and you overhear politicians blaming weed for every social ill. There's no evidence, but it's a convenient excuse to crack down on jazz musicians, immigrants, and anyone with a suspiciously relaxed attitude. You're walking down Main Street and the city is buzzing, not with progress, but with suspicion. Newspapers trumpet alarming stories about marijuana mayhem in the city's bad neighborhoods. Each headline is more dramatic than the last. Reefer madness grips the nation. Dope fiends roam free. It's as if a single plant has snuck into every corner of America, stuffing itself behind every saxophone, bongo drum, and tamale stand. You glance around and realize that according to the morning paper, everyone you know is a potential criminal, including your dentist and possibly your cat. At the barbershop, the usual banter is replaced by whispers. "Did you hear about that jazz club on 7th?" someone says, as if mentioning a haunted house. All sorts of characters in there, musicians, foreigners. No good can come of that. The barber nods, eyes wide. They say it starts with a joint and ends with a life of crime. No one mentions that last week's headline blamed crime on left-handedness and dancing the Charleston. Meanwhile, at City Hall, politicians are holding hearings. No one seems to know much about cannabis, but that doesn't stop them from speculating. Councilman Jones, who once fainted at the smell of oregano, now holds forth on the dangers of reefer-induced violence, which he claims to have read about in a very official-sounding pamphlet printed by his cousin. Every social problem, from rowdy teenagers to late library books, is suddenly pinned on the marijuana menace. If you're poor, brown, or own a trumpet, congratulations. You're officially on the list of suspicious elements. You pass a billboard urging parents to protect your children from jazz and dope. It shows a shadowy figure offering a cigarette to a wide-eyed teen, while a jazz band lurks ominously in the background. If propaganda had a favourite genre, this would be it. Take something people already don't understand, mix in fear, and serve it up at every PTA meeting. Church sermons are delivered with extra gusto. The local reverend solemnly warns that reefer is a gateway to both sinful music and dancing with strangers. You suspect he's more worried about the dancing. Down by the train station, police are making their presence felt. They patrol with the enthusiasm of men who've just read their first detective novel, looking for undesirable types. A young black musician with a clarinet is stopped, questioned, and, despite carrying nothing more than sheet music and a sandwich, sent on his way with a warning. A group of Mexican labourers, in town for the harvest, are eyed warily, their lunch break interrupted by curious officers just checking for any funny business. All it takes to become a suspect is to be seen relaxing, laughing, or humming a tune that didn't come from the church hymnal. Even family dinner gets tense. Someone wonders aloud if the neighbour's backyard garden is a cover for something. You remember when the only thing people worried about was stolen rhubarb. Now it's a full-blown panic, with neighbours turning into amateur detectives and gossip spreading faster than butter at a Sunday brunch. You notice who's getting blamed and who's doing the blaming. It's never the mayor's son or the local pharmacist. The problem is always somewhere else, downtown, across the tracks, over on the wrong side of the radio dial. It doesn't matter that doctors and scientists say the evidence is thin. The politics of fear have spoken, and the crowd never asks for footnotes. The joke, of course, is that for all the noise, nothing has really changed. The music still plays, the parties still happen, the undesirables still get up in the morning, go to work and find a way to laugh. But history's record keeps the receipts. A decade when weed wasn't just a scapegoat, it was the excuse. And as you drift off tonight, you realise the real menace was never the plant. It was the finger-pointing, the whispers, and the comfort of blaming someone else for all the world's woes. If only they'd left the trumpet players and the gardeners out of it. You're running a pharmacy in 1937 when the Marijuana Tax Act lands on your desk. You can keep selling cannabis if you buy the world's most expensive tax stamp. Spoiler, the government never actually prints the stamps. You stare at the new law, its pages crackling with official government optimism and vague threats. The act itself is a masterpiece of legal doublespeak. You can keep doing what you've always done, as long as you fill out 17 forms, pay for a stamp that doesn't exist and promise not to breathe too loudly while handling your wares. Your shelves are lined with familiar bottles, cannabis tinctures, Indian hemp balms, and the odd cough syrup guaranteed to knock out a mule. But now every single drop is technically contraband, unless you have the magic paper. You send off your request for the stamp, enclosing your fee, a signed declaration, and the last of your patients. Days go by. Weeks. Nothing arrives. The postman, who usually brings cheerful gossip and catalogues for tractors you can't afford, looks increasingly apologetic as he hands over nothing but more instructions. Maybe it's coming tomorrow, he shrugs. The official motto of every bureaucracy. Meanwhile, customers wander in, prescriptions in hand, asking for the same soothing medicines they've used for years. You explain sheepishly that you're waiting for a stamp. Yes, just a stamp. And for now, you can't legally dispense the one thing that helped their insomnia, their arthritis, their nervous chihuahuas. You point to the new compliance section. Cough syrup with extra menthol, headache powder with a suspiciously high sugar content, and a muscle rub that smells like it should be cleaning floors, not relieving pain. The newspapers announce the Tax Act with triumphant headlines. Government cracks down on dope. New law will save the nation's youth. Only the fine print reveals the twist. You can still sell cannabis, but only if you possess the stamp. No stamp, no sale. No sale, no medicine. The government, it seems, has invented a new form of prohibition, one enforced not by police raids or dramatic speeches, but by a shortage of stationery. Your local physician is equally baffled. He's spent years recommending cannabis for everything from migraines to excessive mother-in-law tension. Now he shakes his head, muttering about paperwork and progress. How hard is it to print a stamp, he asks. You have no answer. The local stamp collector, who boasts a drawer full of rare 2-cent pieces, is suddenly the most envied man in town, despite the fact that even he's never seen the elusive cannabis stamp. Some brave souls attempt to keep selling the old remedies under the counter, using code words like herbal extract or special drops. Others simply give up, moving their business to less controversial lines, like foot powder or vitamins that taste like sadness. The pharmacy's back room, once a haven of potions and hope, slowly fills with unsellable stock. You catch yourself reminiscing about the good old days, when your biggest legal concern was the occasional bootleg bottle of whiskey tucked in with a shipment of cough syrup. Enforcement is haphazard at first, but soon enough the government makes examples of unlucky pharmacists. Fines are levied, stock is confiscated, and stern men in hats fill out forms in triplicate. You're told the stamps are in process, but the months crawl by, and the only thing arriving by post is the steady trickle of anxiety. Eventually you stop asking. Years later, you'll dust off one of the old bottles, its faded label promising relief in 3 gentle spoonfuls. You'll remember the stamp that never was, and how an entire chapter of medicine ended, not with a bang, but with a missing piece of paper and a nation suddenly allergic to common sense. As you close up shop for the night, you reflect on the irony. In America, it turns out you can regulate a plant out of existence with nothing but a little red tape and a stamp that only exists in your imagination. One day you're growing hemp, the next you're a criminal. Suddenly your neighbour's tomato patch looks less like a garden and more like a legal liability. You wonder if the feds can tell the difference. It's a bright Tuesday morning and you're tending to your backyard as usual, watering a little, talking to your tomatoes, arguing with the cucumber vines about personal space. Your pride and joy a tidy row of hemp plants, sways in the breeze next to the beans. Not so long ago, they were a point of pride at the county fair. The mayor himself once complimented your fine, sturdy stalks. Now they might as well be a crime scene. The word spreads quietly at first. Mrs. Purdy, 3 houses down, swears she saw a government man snooping around the hardware store asking about suspicious vegetation. Old Joe at the feed mill claims he had to dig up half his backyard to prove he was only growing squash. You start to look at every shrub with suspicion. Is that rhubarb or evidence? Did the neighbour's kid always spend this much time with the oregano? Official notices start to appear in the mail. First, a pamphlet, Know the Law, Is Your Garden Legal?, featuring blurry black and white photos of forbidden foliage that could honestly be anything if you squint. Then, an official letter with a stern government seal reminding you to dispose of all unregistered cannabis and related products. There's even a tip line for anonymous reports. You water your plants and try not to look guilty. The local newspaper shifts from stories of prize-winning veggies to tales of midnight raids and devilish weeds. Every headline seems to warn of busts and bans. You read about Mrs. Abernathy, who ended up on the wrong side of the law after growing suspiciously lush herbs. The photo shows her standing next to her beloved mint bush, looking both defiant and slightly confused. The town's social order turns upside down. The garden club, once a haven for jam recipes and friendly gossip, now sounds like a meeting of underworld kingpins. People swap stories about which plants are safe, and which could land you on the 6 o'clock news. Don't trust the zucchinis, whispers Mrs. Lynn. They're covering for something. You try to stay calm. Surely you think nobody will care about a few backyard hemp plants, especially ones you've had for years. But rumours fly. The feds are using planes to spot illegal gardens from the sky. You imagine a federal agent squinting through binoculars, unable to tell a tomato from a turnip. The town's only pilot suddenly has a waiting list for joyrides, as everyone wants to know just how suspicious their backyard looks from the air. Suddenly, neighbourly trust goes out the window. People build taller fences, plant extra marigolds as camouflage, and start speaking in code at the farmer's market. You see people buying sacks of dirt and shovels at odd hours. Just some, late-season tulip bulbs, one man says, sweating nervously. Eventually you realise that your peaceful backyard is no longer just a space for relaxation. It's a potential crime scene, a legal minefield, and, on a good day, a great hiding place for the neighbour's missing garden gnome. You spend your evenings looking up plant identification guides and daydreaming about a time when the biggest gardening controversy was whether carrots or beets tasted more like dirt. As the months pass, some people dig up their plants and resign themselves to boring lawns. Others get creative, training tomatoes to sprawl over the forbidden patch, or growing experimental cucumbers that, if questioned, you claim are for science. There are even whispered rumours of underground seed swaps, secret greenhouses and hemp speakeasies behind the compost bins. By the time autumn arrives, your garden is a shadow of its former glory. The hemp is gone, replaced by a cautious patch of sunflowers and the world's most paranoid patch of lettuce. You still look over the fence at your neighbour's tomato plants, half expecting to see flashing blue lights and men in hats with badges. But mostly, you just miss the days when a plant was just a plant, and the only crime in your backyard was forgetting to water the zucchini. You're on the road with a jazz band in the 1940s. The crowds love you, but the local sheriff is convinced your trumpet case is filled with trouble. Every performance is one bad traffic stop away from the slammer. You wake up in a stuffy tour bus, your head still ringing with the final notes from last night's encore. The bus smells like coffee, sweat, and a hint of yesterday's aftershave. Outside, a new town rises on the horizon, another dance hall, another smoky club, another sheriff waiting to see what sort of chaos the jazz band will bring. You rub your eyes and check your pockets, making sure you haven't accidentally packed anything that will get you into more trouble than your saxophonist's sense of humour. Breakfast is at a greasy diner, where the cook wears a smile as big as his spatula. Fans slip in for autographs, some bringing their kids to meet the kings of swing, others sneaking a wink and whispering that they know what's really in that trumpet case. You smile, sign a few napkins, and reassure the small child that, no, you don't keep snakes in your saxophone. Not anymore, anyway. The day's first problem arrives on schedule. The bus is pulled over before you even hit the city limits. The sheriff, all mirrored sunglasses and slow drawl, circles the bus like a cat sizing up a row of plump canaries. "Heard you folks play a wild tune," he says, peeking through the window. This here a respectable tour? Or you hiding reefer in the drum kit? You assure him the wildest thing you're hiding is a half-eaten sandwich and a love letter from last night's trumpet soloist. But the questions keep coming. The 1940s are no friend to jazz musicians, especially those who look or sound different from the local crowd. The band's skin tones are a little too varied, their slang too sharp, their laughter too loud for the comfort of small-town lore. The sheriff's real suspicion isn't about the trumpet case, it's about the music, the rhythm, the confidence of people who don't seem properly worried. At the club, you haul your gear inside, careful not to let any contraband so much as peek out of its case. You joke with the pianist that one wrong note might get you arrested. He laughs, but you both know he's only half kidding. Still, as the night goes on, the dance floor fills, the band hits its stride, and for a couple of glorious hours nobody cares about laws or luggage. It's just music and sweat and the kind of happiness that gets you a little closer to dawn. After the show, the sheriff is waiting outside. The band packs up in record time, hearts thumping a little faster than the closing number. The sheriff shines a flashlight into every case, his nose wrinkling at the smell of travel and talent. "You folks better be careful," he says, almost wistfully. "Not everyone around here likes music that much." You nod, promise to behave, and hope the next town has a sheriff with fewer opinions about trombones. Still, the rumours follow. At every stop, someone swears they saw the drummer acting suspicious, or the singer looking dazed. The newspapers run stories about jazz bands and dope, about wild nights and corrupting influences. Your picture ends up in the local paper, sandwiched between a warning about the flu and an ad for cough syrup containing more alcohol than your hotel minibar. The truth is, most of the trouble never actually happens. It's all suspicion, all sideways glances and anxious whispers, a cloud of paranoia that follows the band from city to city. You keep playing, keep laughing, and keep your trumpet case closed tight, mostly full of sheet music, sometimes an extra shirt, never the chaos everyone expects. As the bus rolls on to the next town, you stare out the window and wonder what the sheriff will think you're hiding next. You hope it's just the music, because that's always been the real danger, the power of a wild tune to make people dance, to make them think, to make them just a little less afraid, if only for one more song. You're sitting through a public health lecture, watching as government scientists try to prove that cannabis causes insanity, laziness, and an uncontrollable urge to play chess. The evidence? Well, trust them. It's the late 1930s, and you've been herded into the city auditorium alongside a crowd of citizens who would rather be anywhere else. The stage is dominated by a giant easel with alarming diagrams, two men in white coats, and a stack of pamphlets promising the truth about marijuana and mental decay. The local newspaper called it a crucial event for public health. Your neighbour calls it a free excuse to skip work. You call it what it is, another instalment of America's long-running series, Let's Panic About Something New. The first scientist clears his throat and points to a chart labelled the downward spiral. On it, a cartoon teenager tries a joint, then immediately begins a swift descent, missing chores, skipping school, and in a truly horrifying twist, becoming a jazz fan. The audience gasps as the scientist announces, "One puff," and your child may lose interest in wholesome activities like farming and competitive apple peeling. Someone in the back is still trying to figure out if this is a joke. You notice the scientific evidence is mostly stories about third cousins of someone's neighbour who once acted oddly after listening to a saxophone solo. The next speaker details a groundbreaking study where rats, exposed to cannabis smoke, lost all motivation to run on their tiny treadmills. They just sat there, the scientist explained solemnly. Sometimes they played chess. You wonder if perhaps the rats were just tired, or maybe they'd already run enough laps for one lifetime. A volunteer is called to the stage, young, nervous, and suspiciously unenthusiastic about being there. He's handed a fake joint, strictly for demonstration, then asked to stare dramatically into the audience while the lecturer intones, "Notice the glazed look, the lethargy, the sudden fascination with jazz improvisation. Classic symptoms. You're starting to suspect that the only madness in the room is coming from the presenters themselves." The show continues and the data becomes more creative. One graph, inexplicably shaped like a pineapple, suggests that communities with cannabis users are more likely to have chess clubs. Another chart, clearly repurposed from a pie baking contest, reveals a suspicious correlation between weed consumption and taking naps. The scientist shrugs. "We believe there is a link." Questions from the audience are discouraged. When someone asks if there are any actual statistics, the scientists quickly move on to a demonstration involving a rubber brain and a pointer. "This is your brain on marijuana," one of them announces, mashing the rubber brain with unnecessary enthusiasm. The crowd murmurs, half convinced, half hungry for lunch. As the lecture wraps up, the scientists remind everyone to be vigilant. Report neighbours who seem too relaxed, children who hum unfamiliar tunes, and anyone showing excessive enthusiasm for board games. Remember, the speaker concludes, science is about asking questions, but not too many questions. On your way out, you collect a pamphlet with a list of warning signs, sudden interest in philosophy, laughing at puns, eating snacks at odd hours, lingering in music stores, or, worst of all, challenging others to a game of chess. It's unclear if any of these are actually crimes, but you tuck the pamphlet into your pocket anyway. You never know when you'll need a laugh. Later that night, you recount the lecture to your friends, doing your best impression of the rubber brain demonstration. The group agrees. If laziness, jazz, and chess are signs of madness, you're in serious trouble. Still, there's comfort in the absurdity, knowing that no amount of lectures can quite drown out the real rhythm of life, where people keep asking questions, keep telling stories, and yes, occasionally challenge each other to a very relaxed game of chess, and as you drift off, you can't help but smile. Science, it turns out, is only as good as the questions it asks and the jokes it inspires along the way. It's the 1950s, and every doctor suddenly forgets that cannabis was ever used in medicine. New drugs come in shiny packages, and nobody mentions that Grandma's cough syrup was 10% weed. You're sitting in the waiting room of Dr. Henderson's office, staring at a wall of medical diplomas and a clock that's been 5 minutes slow since Eisenhower was elected. The nurse, starched and serious, offers you a glass of water and a pamphlet about modern remedies. On the cover is a cartoon pill with arms, a smile, and the unmistakable energy of someone who's never had to listen to a jazz record in their life. The shelves behind the pharmacy counter are lined with tidy boxes. Wonderol, Nerve Soothe, Sleep Ease, and something called Laxo Lux that promises comfort at any speed. When the doctor finally calls your name, he's wearing the crispest white coat you've ever seen, and the look of a man who's just discovered the world's first headache. What seems to be the trouble, he asks, and you list the usual. Sleeplessness, aches, that nagging feeling in your left elbow, existential dread. He nods sympathetically and scribbles on a notepad, already reaching for a colourful bottle. "We have a wonderful new pill for that," he says, and hands you a sample box decorated with gold stars and a vaguely futuristic logo. You glance around the office, searching for any sign of the old remedies. Once upon a time, every shelf in town held bottles of cannabis tincture, jars of Indian hemp ointment, and little boxes of lozenges for nerves and coughs. They were as common as aspirin, so common that you'd find half-empty bottles at yard sales, or tucked behind ancient tins of baking powder in Grandma's kitchen. But now the word cannabis has vanished. Not even a whisper. If you mention it, the doctor coughs politely and changes the subject to the weather. At the local pharmacy, the shift is just as strange. Gone are the colourful glass bottles and handwritten labels. Everything is uniform, sterile, and, if you're honest, less fun. The pharmacist, who used to recommend a drop of Miss Mary Jane's cordial for sleepless nights, now touts a brand new line of safe modern sedatives with names that sound like racehorses. The regulars nod along, as if they've all agreed not to remember that a decade ago, the best cough syrup in town was 10% cannabis and 30% wishful thinking. Your neighbour, Mrs. Watkins, confides that she still has a secret stash of the old stuff. "Best thing for a cold," she whispers, producing a dusty bottle with a faded label. "Just don't let the doctor see." She claims it's only for emergencies, meaning long winters, in-laws, and the occasional town meeting that goes past 9 o'clock. You wonder how many grandmothers are quietly defying modern medicine one spoonful at a time. Meanwhile, advertisements fill the radio waves and magazine pages, promising that these new scientific miracles are superior in every way. There are jingles for every symptom. Tired? Try the tablet. Cranky? Swallow the syrup. No mention of herbs, roots, or green bottles. It's as if an entire chapter of medical history has been collectively, deliberately forgotten. Your local historian calls it progress. Your grandmother calls it nonsense. The new pills work, sometimes. But as you lie in bed, you can't help but remember the gentle clink of a dropper against a teacup, the syrupy sweetness of old-fashioned medicine, and the quiet comfort of remedies that came from the earth, not a laboratory. You wonder if doctors really forgot, or if forgetting just became easier than explaining. One day, you find an old ad for cannabis cough syrup tucked into the pages of a family Bible. The doctor's signature at the bottom looks familiar. You hold it up, half amused and half nostalgic. In a world so eager to move forward, you marvel at how easy it is to leave the past behind, even when it's only as far away as the back of Grandma's kitchen cupboard. You flip through a 1960s magazine and see your first cartoon of a droopy-eyed slacker surrounded by pizza boxes. Suddenly stoner is a punchline, except to the millions of people quietly using weed for everything from pain to PTSD. You pause, staring at the page. The cartoon slacker has hair like a mop, socks that don't match, and a wardrobe that suggests he lost a bet with a tie-dye salesman. There's a half-eaten sandwich on the floor, lava lamp on the shelf, and speech bubble that reads, "Whoa, man, I forgot what I was saying." In the background, an open window and a stack of pizza boxes suggest a life lived somewhere between the refrigerator and a vague sense of time. If you listen closely, you can almost hear a sitar playing. It's the age of rock and roll, flower power, and 3 TV channels. The magazines and late-night comedians are obsessed. The stoner becomes a fixture, lazy, confused, always hungry, always late. Your aunt watches a sitcom and shakes her head. No ambition, she tuts. Your cousin snickers and slips a comic under his pillow, partly for the joke, partly for the recipe for magical brownies on the next page. The stereotype is everywhere. High school assembly? There's a skit about the dangers of becoming that kid, the one who never finishes his homework and might accidentally microwave a shoe. Ads warn that if you smoke weed, you'll forget your chores, your math homework, and possibly your own birthday. The cautionary tale is always the same: smoke, snack, nap, repeat. You'd think weed turned people into very chill goldfish. Meanwhile, the real world is, as usual, more complicated. Behind the haze of cartoons and comedy, there's a quiet army of people who don't fit the punchline. Veterans using cannabis to sleep through the night, housewives with arthritis, secretively brewing up special tea, college kids swapping joints for migraines and nerves. None of them look like the guy in the magazine. They have jobs, bills, families, and more than anything, a deep desire not to be in pain. Of course, the law doesn't care about nuance, neither do the TV writers. You watch as politicians pick up the joke and run with it, turning policy into farce. Do we want a nation of slackers, they ask, as if everyone's in imminent danger of becoming a couch potato. No one mentions the bus driver who uses weed for his bad back, or the grandmother who keeps her tincture in an old cough syrup bottle. At college, the line between fact and fiction blurs even further. On campus, stoner is a costume for parties and Halloween, bell-bottoms, peace signs, and exaggerated yawns. But in the dorms, you overhear whispered conversations about anxiety and pain, about friends who'd rather risk detention than another night of insomnia. You realise the real story is happening quietly, out of sight, as it always does. You look back at the magazine and wonder, who invented this stereotype? Was it a bored cartoonist, a politician with a speech to fill, or just a culture that needed someone to laugh at? You wish they'd drawn the truth, someone holding down a job, folding laundry, and using cannabis not to tune out, but to survive the daily grind. The years roll by, but the image sticks. Stoner becomes shorthand for anyone who doesn't fit the mould of upstanding citizen, and yet millions of upstanding citizens just keep quietly passing the joint, making dinner and paying taxes. The world, it turns out, is always more complicated than the cartoon. As you turn the page, you decide you prefer real people to punchlines, because behind every stereotype is a story, and sometimes the joke just misses the truth by a mile, and a pizza box. It's 1971. And Richard Nixon just declared war on drugs. You're not sure if your shag carpet is legal anymore, but you're pretty sure your dad's record collection isn't. You wake up to the sound of the radio blaring, Nixon's voice echoing down the hallway like a stern principal announcing surprise locker inspections. America's public enemy number 1 is drug abuse, he proclaims, as if every home in the country is secretly a den of tie-dye chaos. Your mother turns down the volume and sweeps the living room, giving the family houseplant a suspicious look. You pull on your bell-bottoms, hoping they're not considered paraphernalia under the latest federal guidelines. The television is a parade of warnings. School assemblies are suddenly full of guest speakers with government pamphlets and very worried eyebrows. The message is clear. Drugs are everywhere, and they're out to ruin your life, steal your allowance, and possibly hide your car keys. The local news runs a segment about danger lurking in your child's sock drawer. You check yours, just in case the family dog has been smuggling contraband. At school, your health teacher tries to explain the difference between marijuana, heroin, and the suspicious poppy seed muffin in the cafeteria. You leave the lecture convinced that both the Rolling Stones and bagels are somehow part of a vast criminal conspiracy. The guidance counsellor hands out pamphlets with cover art that looks like it was designed by someone who's never seen a joint, but has strong feelings about disco. Meanwhile, the neighbourhood shifts from friendly to furtive. Mrs. Peterman down the street eyes everyone's mailbox, convinced that government agents are lurking in the shrubs. The Johnsons host a barbecue and spend half the time debating whether the new oregano plant in their herb garden is asking for trouble. Your dad, normally unflappable, quietly moves his copy of Revolver to the back of the record shelf, just behind a stack of Reader's Digests. You start to wonder if it's possible to get grounded for listening to Jefferson Airplane. On TV, Nixon is joined by a parade of politicians declaring zero tolerance for dangerous substances, a phrase that seems to include everything from jazz music to hair gel. Police sirens are suddenly louder, traffic stops a little longer, and the line at the pharmacy a little more anxious. Your grandma hides her poppy seed cake recipe in a tin marked emergency, right next to a jar of instant coffee and a half-knitted scarf. In the magazines, the stoner stereotype explodes. Cartoons of lazy teenagers with suspiciously happy pets fill the back pages, sandwiched between ads for anti-dandruff shampoo and weight loss gum. Talk show hosts trade stories about wild parties and gateway drugs, while nobody mentions that your neighbour's wildest secret is a hidden collection of novelty salt shakers. You can't help but notice that the war feels uneven. It's not the kids from the fancy neighbourhoods getting searched, or the rock stars on magazine covers who end up in court. It's the people on the margins, musicians, immigrants, young activists, who get the early morning knocks on the door. The paranoia trickles down, dividing families, neighbours, and even the school chess club, which now meets in total silence. The irony is that even as the laws tighten, the world keeps turning. Your mum still makes brownies, the record player still spins, and somewhere, behind closed doors, people light up, not out of rebellion, but just to relax after a day of being told they're part of the nation's biggest problem. You close your eyes, listening to the distant rumble of a passing police car, and wonder what will be outlawed next: roller skates, yo-yos, or perhaps your little brother's lava lamp. As the year rolls on, the war on drugs becomes less about actual substances and more about suspicion. The only thing everyone can agree on, everyone can. It's exhausting. So you flop onto the questionable shag carpet, put on headphones, and hope that at least music, whatever the genre, is still legal when you wake up. It's the late 1960s, and you're stuck in a 3-day traffic jam at the Mexican border while federal agents search every car for marijuana. You miss your cousin's wedding, but at least you're now an expert in glovebox cleaning. The sun is merciless. Your station wagon is part of a crawling parade of Chevys, Beetles, and battered pickup trucks stretching for miles, each one inching forward at the speed of continental drift. Federal agents, resplendent in mirrored sunglasses and hats, large enough to double as picnic shelters, wave each car over with all the enthusiasm of a man sorting socks. They peer through your windows, poke the upholstery, and ask questions like, "Are you carrying anything herbal?" in the tone of a teacher who suspects you of cheating on a spelling test. You pass the hours studying the fine art of glovebox organisation. There's a whole ecosystem living in there. Expired insurance cards, 5 napkins, and a petrified stick of gum. You dust everything off, stack the paperwork, and vow to never, ever accumulate so many ketchup packets again. Your travel companions argue over whose turn it is to recite the alphabet backwards, just in case the agents think you look too relaxed. The radio is wall-to-wall coverage. Operation Intercept! The voice crackles through static, explaining that President Nixon has declared a national emergency. Marijuana is allegedly pouring over the border, corrupting youth and inspiring dangerous levels of bongo enthusiasm. You can't help but wonder if they're checking for bongo drums as well. Every so often, an agent waves someone out of line and starts unpacking suitcases, picnic baskets, and, once, a truly impressive stack of Mexican wrestling masks. The search always seems to end with a lecture and the confiscation of an avocado. People get restless, A makeshift community forms, a swap meet of snacks, sunscreen, and increasingly creative theories about what the agents are really looking for. Is it the plant? The seeds? That weird smell coming from the cooler in the back seat? A woman in a floppy hat hands out lemonade, and stories about the good old days before crossing the border required 3 forms of ID and a background check on your goldfish. You spot a wedding invitation, wrinkled and accusatory, reminding you what you're missing. Your cousin's big day is happening 50 miles away, and you're spending your weekend sweating in traffic and trying to remember if oregano is a suspicious herb. The only thing more impressive than the line is the collection of conspiracy theories swirling around. Someone swears they saw a dog trained to sniff out jazz records. Another insists the agents have a list of suspicious license plates. Yours, apparently, is 1 digit away from infamy. The border town, usually bustling, is reduced to a parking lot. Local vendors drift between cars selling churros, sodas, and, with exquisite irony, tiny cactus plants in little clay pots. Nobody asks if the cacti are legal. The kids in the next car over have started a game of Spot the Undercover Agent, awarding points for each pair of mirrored sunglasses and every moustache that seems a bit too deliberate. By the time you reach the checkpoint, you could write a thesis on traffic patterns and snack-based diplomacy. The agent glances through your window, sniffs theatrically, and asks where you've been, where you're going, and whether you know the full lyrics to La Cucaracha. You try to look innocent, as if your only vice is overcooked coffee. After 3 days, the line finally breaks. You're free, minus a handful of snacks, 1 avocado, and a considerable amount of patience. The wedding is over, but you have a new appreciation for border bureaucracy, sunburn, and the resilience of glove boxes everywhere. Later, you'll hear that the whole spectacle caught headlines, spooked a generation, and did almost nothing to change the supply of anything except boredom. But you made it home, with only a faint scent of churros, and the vague suspicion that your goldfish was interrogated in your absence. The 1980s have arrived. You're sitting cross-legged on the linoleum as a police officer in a windbreaker explains, again, that marijuana is a gateway to breakdancing and jazzercise. You look around the classroom, taking in the pastel posters of eagles and neon triangles. Your best friend is quietly poking holes in his shoelaces. The teacher stands at the back, arms crossed, supervising this annual ritual. The police officer paces in front, gesturing with a bright orange D.A.R.E. pen and a level of intensity usually reserved for bomb defusal or Wheel of Fortune finales. Kids, he says, if you take 1 puff, next thing you know you'll be doing the moonwalk on the cafeteria table. He shows you a poster, hand-drawn in coloured marker. This is your brain on drugs. There's an egg. There's a frying pan. You're not sure what the message is, but now you're hungry and slightly suspicious of breakfast. The officer describes a shadowy underworld where peer pressure lurks behind every locker, and 1 wrong step leads to a lifetime of jazzercise VHS tapes and regrettable haircuts. The facts come rapid fire. Marijuana is a gateway drug, which means if you say yes, you're basically already buying a ticket to a life of crime, jazzercise, and possibly interpretive dance. You try to remember if your uncle, who still listens to disco and keeps an aloe plant on the windowsill, might be part of a breakdancing cartel. The classroom erupts in giggles, and the officer turns stern. Don't laugh, kids. This is serious. You watch as your teacher passes out bright red D.A.R.E. Folders filled with comic strips, quizzes, and a contract you're supposed to sign, promising you'll just say no. You sign with the confidence of someone who's never been offered anything more illicit than an extra pudding cup at lunch. The officer asks for questions, and someone asks if coffee counts. He pauses. Well, moderation, kids. Moderation. At recess, the rumours start. Someone claims his cousin's friend's sister got caught with a Mary Jane sticker and now has to take extra gym. Another says if you even walk past someone with a joint, you'll get grounded forever. The line between legend and lecture is blurry. But one thing's for sure, nobody wants to end up on the wrong side of the D.A.R.E. oath, especially with yearbook photos coming up. The campaign goes everywhere. You see D.A.R.E. bumper stickers on minivans, D.A.R.E. t-shirts at the mall, and a D.A.R.E. mascot, a lion with a permanent look of concern at the local parade. Every school assembly has a segment, every teacher has a handout, and every kid has a parent asking, "So what did you learn in D.A.R.E. today?" You want to say that my brain is a breakfast food, but instead you mumble something about peer pressure and stay silent about the egg. You notice that behind all the noise, the message is less about information and more about confusion. Nobody asks why some kids need help, or why some parents worry more about dinner than drugs. It's all boiled down to a slogan, a sticker, and a handshake with the police officer who might secretly wish he were teaching jazzercise instead. As the years go by, the memories blend together. Scrambled eggs, neon folders, and the sound of a windbreaker swooshing past the overhead projector. The D.A.R.E. contract gets lost in a drawer, wedged between a scratch and sniff sticker and a mixtape labeled "Do not play in front of Mom." But as you look back, you realise the real lesson wasn't about marijuana. It was about panic, performance, and the glorious confusion of being a kid in the 1980s. And maybe, just maybe, how to moonwalk, just in case. Bob Marley is on the radio, and suddenly every college dorm in America smells like incense and hope. You're learning about ganja as cultural symbol, spiritual sacrament, and, most importantly, a reggae lyric. It's the late 1970s, and your roommate is trying to figure out how to roll something that looks more like a wrinkled receipt than a joint. The dorm RA has gone suspiciously quiet about curfew violations, replaced instead by a debate about the meaning of life and whether reggae is best played at sunrise or literally all the time. The halls echo with new words: eerie, one love, and, of course, ganja. There's a Bob Marley poster on every wall, sharing space with neon butterflies, and a few motivational quotes about staying hydrated. The local record store can barely keep reggae albums in stock. Students huddle around stereos, heads bobbing in sync as the sound of syncopated guitars and offbeat drums spills down the hall. Someone always manages to produce a battered copy of Catch a Fire or Exodus, spinning stories about Jamaica, revolution, and the Rastafarian faith with the confidence of someone who once skimmed a National Geographic article in the dentist's office. For the first time, weed isn't just an act of rebellion, it's a bridge. You listen as friends talk about Rastafarian rituals, sacred herbs, and the wisdom of Haile Selassie, who, according to dorm legend, could bench press a tractor and once cured a cold by singing a particularly moving verse of Three Little Birds. Ganja is everywhere in these stories, woven into tales of spiritual awakening, peaceful resistance, and the universal need to chill out. But as with all things imported, the American version of Rasta culture gets a little, let's say, creative. Your neighbour adopts a Jamaican accent that's somehow more Minnesota than Kingston. Beaded necklaces and authentic knit hats, made in Ohio, become wardrobe staples. Someone brings a bongo drum to breakfast. By Tuesday, there are rumours of a reggae study group forming in the library, although most of the studying involves comparing incense blends and inventing reasons to open windows. Meanwhile, your professors try to keep up. Sociology classes feature units on world music and alternative religions, taught by a guy in a corduroy jacket who keeps quoting Marley lyrics instead of giving grades. Campus security, meanwhile, tries to decode the difference between medicinal, recreational, and what's that smell. At least one janitor becomes an overnight hero by swapping out the air fresheners for something that actually works. Out in the real world, reggae and Rastafarianism start to reshape the conversation about cannabis. Activists hold up Marley and his faith as proof that ganja isn't just a vice, but a tool for peace, creativity, and spiritual connection. Weed becomes a symbol of cultural exchange, an olive branch with rolling papers. Politicians and TV hosts try to debate its influence on youth, while forgetting that most youth are too busy making mixtapes to listen. You realise the story is bigger than your dorm. From Kingston to California, ganja is suddenly on everyone's lips, sometimes reverently, sometimes clumsily, always with a sense that something important is happening. For every misguided attempt at a Jamaican accent, there's a genuine effort to learn, to understand, to share. Years later, you'll still remember those smoky nights. The laughter, the music, the feeling that the world was getting a little smaller and a lot kinder. And as the sun comes up and Marley's voice drifts through the window, you understand why ganja was never just a plant. It was an invitation to listen, connect, and maybe, just maybe, live a little more eerie, and of course, to always let the air out after burning incense. Fast forward to the 1990s. Activists in California are fighting to bring cannabis back into medicine. You're canvassing neighborhoods with a clipboard, hoping nobody calls your mum. You're wearing sneakers with too much arch support, a faded legalize it button, and the nervous energy of someone who still gets carded at R-rated movies. The sun is high, the air tinged with orange blossoms and the faint scent of a nearby taqueria, and you're on a mission, armed with a stack of petitions and a carefully practiced speech about patient rights. Every doorbell brings a new adventure. Sometimes it's a grandmother who whispers that her rheumatism remedy used to come in a green glass bottle. Other times it's a guy in a tie-dye shirt who signs before you even finish saying medical. Your friends think you're brave. Your parents think you're making questionable choices. Just don't get arrested, your mum says, peering over her glasses as you head out, as if you're about to knock on the door of the DEA itself. And don't talk to strangers. You remind her gently that canvassing sort of requires talking to strangers, but you promise not to talk to anyone who looks like they have a badge or an unusually crisp haircut. California is changing. The news is full of stories. AIDS patients fighting for access to cannabis to ease nausea, cancer survivors testifying about pain relief, and activists marching with giant banners featuring cartoon leaves. You catch glimpses of them on the local news, their faces pixelated, voices disguised like a parade of botanical superheroes with a really specific mission. Politicians debate furiously, one side predicting chaos, the other promising compassion. The neighborhoods are a patchwork of opinions. Some people nod and thank you for your time, telling stories about the old days when their family doctor had a bottle of tincture for every ailment. Others slam the door before you even mention medicine, muttering about reefer madness and slippery slopes. A surprising number ask if you know where to buy rolling papers. You do not. You learn a lot about hope and fear, about bureaucracy and biology. The arguments in favour are endless: relief from pain, stimulation of appetite, reduction of seizures. The arguments against mostly involve slippery slopes, vague references to the children, and the belief that any plant requiring that much paperwork is surely up to no good. Every signature feels like a tiny revolution. You collect them from skateboarders and accountants, nurses and retirees, people who believe that medicine shouldn't be a crime. The petition stack grows thicker. You start to believe that maybe, just maybe, change is possible. One awkward, sunburned afternoon at a time. At night, you gather with other volunteers in a living room decorated with lava lamps and protest posters. There's pizza, herbal tea, and the hum of hope. Someone reads out the latest numbers, and you all cheer when the tally breaks a new record. Outside, the world seems poised on the edge of something. There's talk of ballot measures, court cases, and the possibility that, for the first time in generations, cannabis might be welcomed back into the medical cabinet. When victory finally comes, a narrow one, with more legal hurdles than a track meet you celebrate by calling your mum. She's relieved. She's proud. She still doesn't want you talking to strangers, but she agrees that maybe, sometimes, strange ideas are worth listening to. In the years that follow, the dominoes start to fall. Other states debate, vote, and legalize. The conversation shifts from whispers to headlines. Cannabis is medicine again, imperfect, controversial, and still the subject of heated debate, but no longer erased, no longer just a punchline. And as you drift off that night, clipboard by your bed, you realize history doesn't always move in a straight line. Sometimes it circles back, just in time for another awkward family dinner, another ballot, another day spent knocking on doors for a cause that's finally, slowly, coming home. It's the early 2000s, and anti-weed PSAs are everywhere. You and your friends watch them ironically on TV, rating each one for drama, accuracy, and the number of times the word brain damage is used. You sprawl across a faded couch, a bowl of popcorn balanced dangerously on your knees, as another government-funded commercial flickers to life. The TV screen is filled with ominous music and the kind of voiceover that usually only happens when someone's about to warn you about the dangers of eating uncooked chicken. A cartoon teenager stares into the camera, eyes wide with existential dread. "I used marijuana once," she intones, "and now I live in a grey, confusing world of C-minuses and forgotten birthdays." Your friends howl with laughter. Each PSA tries a new strategy. Some are pure melodrama. A single joint leads to a montage of slamming doors, broken promises, and at least one parent staring tragically out a rainy window. Others are weirdly specific. "This is your brain on drugs," announces a talking egg, before being smashed by a frying pan with the fury of a reality TV judge. You give it a 7 out of 10 for creativity, but dock points for lack of nutritional information. There's a classic where a girl literally melts into the couch, as if weed transforms you from an honours student to a particularly sticky puddle of regret. "What do you think, guys?" you ask. "Is this more melting, or slowly deflating?" Someone yells, 3 stars for the special effects, but -2 for the acting. You agree the dog in the commercial seems more convincing than the actors. After a while, it becomes a game. You invent a scoring system, bonus points for the words gateway drug, a 5-point deduction if anyone says reefer, and an automatic win if a public official tries to sound hip by rapping about responsibility. It's less a warning and more a late-night comedy routine. You realise half the PSAs are written by people who've never been teenagers, much less encountered actual cannabis. Of course, the grown-ups take them seriously. Your health teacher wheels out a TV cart and plays the latest warnings as you sneak notes and try not to laugh too hard. There's an air of theatrical dread in the room, like you're all waiting for someone to leap up and confess to crimes against good posture. Afterward, there's a quiz which you ace thanks to your deep familiarity with the warning signs of listlessness, snacking, and wearing sunglasses indoors. The irony is that the louder the panic gets, the less people seem to care. In the halls, kids trade stories about the time my cousin's friend's neighbour totally spaced out during a spelling bee. Nobody's melting, nobody's joining a jazzercise cult, and the biggest risk most teens face is tripping over their own baggy jeans. Even your grandmother, who lived through reefer madness and D.A.R.E, rolls her eyes at the TV. They said coffee would rot your brain too, she mutters, pouring another cup. Late-night hosts have a field day. Monologues are full of references to the latest over-the-top PSA, and you start to recognise the melting couch actress in a shampoo commercial. Online, message boards fill with parodies, memes, and top 10 lists of the most unintentionally hilarious anti-drug ads. If the government's goal was to get everyone talking about marijuana, congratulations, they succeeded. But behind the irony and laughter, the message is mixed. For every overblown warning, there's a real person who wishes the conversation was less about panic and more about reality, about why people use weed, what it can help, and how to stay safe. You wonder if, someday, the conversation will catch up to the jokes. For now, you click the remote, rate the next PSA, 8 out of 10 for unintentional comedy, 2 out of 10 for realism, and settle in, grateful that your friends can laugh, think, and question, even if you're still a little worried about turning into a puddle the next time you have the TV too loud. Suddenly it's 2014, and you're standing in line at a Colorado dispensary, still half expecting to be arrested. The guy in front of you is buying artisanal sativa and a granola bar. The world has changed, and so have the laws, at least in some places. You check your reflection in the shiny glass door and rehearse your story, just in case someone asks why you're here. For a friend, you tell yourself. For research. For the granola bar. Around you, the line stretches down the block. A patchwork of tourists, soccer moms, tattooed college students, and at least one guy who looks like he just wandered in from a hiking trail. Everyone is buzzing with excitement and a touch of paranoia, like people waiting to ride a roller coaster they're not sure has passed inspection. Inside, the shop feels less like a head shop and more like a coffee house run by Apple. Clean white shelves display jars of flour with names like Bubblegum Bliss, Electric Punch, and that one with the cool label. There are edibles in packaging that would make a chocolatier blush, tinctures with flavour notes, and a display case that looks like it belongs in a museum of modern art, if modern art tasted like lemon haze. The staff wear t-shirts with clever puns, and the serene, unhurried confidence of people who know their job was illegal 5 years ago. "Can I help you find anything?" the budtender asks, grinning. You panic and ask for something beginner-friendly. She nods wisely and suggests a mild hybrid, carefully packaged with a child-proof seal that might require an engineering degree to open. She rings up your purchase with the same routine cheer as a barista taking your order for a tall half-calf oat milk latte. As you pay, you notice a bulletin board filled with local news clippings. Colorado rakes in tax revenue. Cannabis tourism booms. Police officer teaches edibles safety at PTA meeting. Next to it, a flyer for a yoga class titled High and Mindful, and a business card for a ganja wedding planner. You wonder if your grandparents would be more shocked by the weed or the granola bar. Back on the street, you take a cautious look around. No sirens, no helicopter, no undercover agent waiting to tackle you for a bag of gummies. The world has not ended, the ground has not opened up, and the only thing that's really different is that you have a legal receipt with the words, "Thank you for your purchase," printed at the bottom. You walk past a souvenir shop selling tie-dye t-shirts that read, "I got legally baked in Colorado," alongside fridge magnets and, of course, more granola. The legalization circus plays out differently everywhere. In one state, people are opening boutique dispensaries in old bank buildings. In another, politicians are debating how tall a legal plant can be before it becomes a federal offense. Your cousin in Texas calls to ask if it's true you can buy weed like bread, while your aunt in Nebraska whispers, "Be careful crossing the state line, dear." It's a patchwork of green and grey, with every border another twist in the rules. TV pundits yell, activists cheer, and the nation's lawyers buy new houses. Everyone has an opinion. Some worry about the children, others about the traffic, still others about the moral decline of a society that now sells weed-themed yoga mats. But for every debate, there are a dozen quiet moments. Someone using cannabis to sleep, to manage pain, or just to find a little peace. You tuck your purchase into your jacket and realize you're witnessing history, not as a distant headline, but as a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. The circus will keep moving, one state at a time, one ballot at a time, one granola bar at a time. And for now, that's enough. As you head home, you remind yourself, breathe, relax, and don't forget to enjoy the granola bar before someone tries to regulate the snack aisle next. It's the present day. You're scrolling through news about cannabis stocks, new state laws, and your great-aunt's CBD gummies. You can't help but wonder, after a century of paranoia, propaganda, and poorly written laws, how did we get here, and what happens next? You put your phone down for a second, eyes glazed from too many headlines. The stock market ticker keeps scrolling past names like Green Growth, Buds Unlimited, and, inexplicably, Potcoin. States are racing each other to legalize or regulate or at least look busy while they try to figure out how to tax something half the country grows in their backyard. Your neighbour waves at you from across the fence, holding a mug that says World's news coverage swings wildly between panic and celebration. One channel warns of a new era of reefer madness, while the next does a cheery segment on artisanal sativa and the best edibles for brunch. Politicians line up to take credit or lay blame, depending on which way the polls are trending. You watch an interview with a senator who insists he's never tried weed but would support the will of the people, provided it comes in a flavourless, regulation-compliant capsule. Social media is a patchwork of opinions. Your college roommate posts a selfie from inside a dispensary, posing like he's found the Holy Grail, only with more neon. Wellness bloggers offer recipes for CBD kale smoothies, which sound suspiciously like regret. There are endless debates about medical benefits, addiction risks, and whether or not that new cannabis-infused bath bomb is actually doing anything besides making your tub slippery. But beneath the hashtags and headlines, you realize there's still a fog of confusion. The old stereotypes linger. The lazy stoner, the dangerous criminal, the soccer mom with a mysterious cough. Meanwhile, an entire generation is quietly rewriting the rules, normalizing, legalizing, and sometimes overcomplicating the whole business with apps, loyalty programs, and strain-specific podcasts. There's a sense that the country can't decide if weed is a medicine, a menace, or just another thing to argue about at the dinner table. Some states regulate it like plutonium, others treat it like basil, and a few still insist it's a ticket to jazz-induced ruin. The laws don't match, the science is always emerging, and every trip to the dispensary feels a little bit like buying concert tickets in a foreign language. You scroll past an ad for CBD-infused dog treats and a headline about a billionaire launching a cannabis delivery service by drone. Your parents are still a little scandalized, but less so each year, especially now that Grandma swears by her nightly dropper of relaxation oil. You try to explain to your younger cousin that there was a time when people went to jail for a single joint. He's stunned. Wait, like actually jail? You sigh, caught between amusement and exasperation. After a century of scare tactics, shifting laws and generational hand-wringing, it turns out weed is just another thing people do. Maybe the weirdest part is how ordinary it all feels now, how the same plant that sparked 1,000 moral panics is now sold next to lip balm, kale chips, and, in at least one state, artisan dog biscuits. As you put your phone away for the night, you wonder what the next chapter will look like. Will the country finally agree on something? Will the rules catch up to reality? Or will we always be just a little bit weird about weed? For now, you tuck into bed, surrounded by the gentle absurdity of modern life, and realize that sometimes the strangest journey is the one that ends with a perfectly ordinary bedtime snack, CBD caramel optional. It's the 1940s, and you're just a humble gardener tending to your tomatoes, squash, and wait, is that wild hemp? You have no idea how it got there, but now the local sheriff is giving your backyard the kind of side-eye normally reserved for moonshiners. Congratulations, your petunias are now considered suspicious. Better hope your neighbour isn't an amateur botanist with a grudge. You lean on your rake and survey your modest kingdom, rows of vegetables basking in the afternoon sun. The beans are climbing, the carrots are plotting an escape, and the zucchini are multiplying like rabbits. Life is peaceful, until word gets out that suspicious plants have been spotted in town. Suddenly you notice the glances. Mrs. Abernathy's gaze lingers a little too long as she walks her dog past your fence. The mailman slows his bicycle, eyes darting between your dahlias and your gulp, unexpected guest. You didn't plant it. At least you don't remember planting it. But there it is, bold and green, leaves splayed in that unmistakable fashion. Wild hemp, America's former patriotic crop, now the botanical equivalent of harbouring a known outlaw. You try to act casual, humming as you water the tomatoes, but you can feel the neighbourhood's collective suspicion growing faster than your sunflowers. A town meeting is called, because in a small town, nothing breeds more excitement than a new source of panic. The sheriff stands at the front of the church basement, hat in hand, a poster of identifying dangerous weeds on an easel. He urges everyone to remain vigilant and, if necessary, report any unusual gardening activity. You sit quietly in the back, hoping no one remembers your passionate speech about compost at last month's bake sale. The local paper fans the flames, running stories with headlines like "Weeds of Worry," "Is your neighbour hiding hemp?" and botanical blunders when good plants go bad. You begin to question every patch of green. Is that parsley or a cleverly disguised menace? Was that dandelion always so assertive? Your neighbour, Mr. Peterson, casually asks about your gardening secrets, and you reply that you mostly use manure and denial. Tensions rise. The garden club becomes less about roses and more about reconnaissance. Members whisper about whose zucchini are too healthy, and whether Mrs. Lane's kale is just a decoy for more illicit greenery. Seed exchanges are carried out like Cold War handoffs, with envelopes passed under tables and code words like special blend. At home, you wrestle with the ethics of weeding. Do you pull the plant and risk looking guilty, or leave it and hope nobody notices? The wild hemp, for its part, seems to thrive on drama, growing taller every day as if reaching for the headlines. You contemplate disguising it with a decorative flag, or maybe a strategically placed garden gnome. Your children are now experts in plausible deniability. If anyone asks, you instruct, we're growing experimental sunflowers, extra leafy. They nod solemnly, then sneak off to play hide-and-seek behind the compost pile, giggling about the secret plant. Even the dog starts digging suspiciously close to the evidence, as if auditioning for a future in law enforcement. The day of reckoning arrives when the sheriff knocks on your gate, notebook in hand, face set in his "this is serious" expression. He inspects the garden, sniffs the air, and delivers a stern lecture on proper plant identification. You nod, promise to be more careful, and offer him a zucchini the size of a baseball bat. He takes it, reluctantly, and leaves you with a warning about botanical responsibility. After he leaves, you sigh with relief, pat your tomatoes, and pull the wild hemp, quickly, quietly, and with a little regret. It's just a plant, you remind yourself, but sometimes a plant is never just a plant. Sometimes it's the start of a town-wide panic, a new round of neighbourhood gossip, and the realisation that, in America, even your garden can land you on the wrong side of the law. You finish your chores, thankful the worst is over, for now, but you keep a wary eye on the parsley, just in case. Welcome to 1967, the so-called Summer of Love. You're at a music festival, somewhere between the drum circle and the world's least effective homemade granola stand. There's incense, bell-bottoms, and a sea of people debating whether grass is for smoking or composting. Suddenly, a police helicopter flies overhead, and everyone pretends they're just deeply interested in their tie-dye techniques. The sun is high, the crowd is higher, and the air smells like a mix of patchouli, barbecue, and faint anxiety. You're sandwiched between a poet with a sign that reads "Free Hugs," $1, and a man trying to convince you that his hemp sandals are spiritually superior. A band on stage launches into a 12-minute jam that, by minute 6, has started to sound suspiciously like the band warming up for their next 12-minute jam. You glance around, making a mental note to avoid the enchanted brownies. Last time you had one, you spent 3 hours discussing the secret life of turnips with a stranger named Moonbeam. It's the age of peace and rebellion, but underneath the flowers and protest banners is a quiet thread of paranoia. Word spreads fast that the fuzz are nearby. Someone swears they saw a cop disguised as a food vendor. Another insists the lemonade stand is actually a front for surveillance. although you're pretty sure their biggest offence is using too much pulp. Every time someone lights a joint, a dozen people discreetly form a human shield, suddenly fascinated by macrame or their astrology chart. You spot a group of festival goers debating whether it's safer to hide their stash in a guitar case, a bag of granola, or the inner pocket of a velvet vest. Put it in the compost pile, someone suggests. No one will look there. Minutes later, the compost pile has become the busiest part of the festival. Somewhere, a well-meaning gardener is growing the most suspicious batch of tomatoes in Northern California. The music is relentless. Bands play anthems about freedom, love, and the subtle virtues of minding your own business. Someone passes you a hand-rolled cigarette and a warning, don't look suspicious. You do your best, but in a sea of face paint and fringed vests, you're pretty sure suspicious is the new normal. The rumour mill goes wild. Are the police using undercover dogs? Was that a plainclothes officer? Or just a dad trying to find the porta potty? At the edge of the field, the local authorities debate their next move. The police chief surveys the festival with a pair of borrowed binoculars, squinting at a group of teens attempting interpretive dance, while hiding behind a suspiciously large tie-dye tapestry. We'll wait until they start the conga line, he mutters. That's when the real action happens. Back at your blanket, you listen to someone explain the cosmic significance of hemp, the healing power of music, and the likelihood that you'll end up on the evening news if you're not careful. Everyone laughs a little too loud, then falls silent as the helicopter swoops by again, causing a ripple of sudden interest in embroidery. By nightfall, paranoia has woven itself into the festival fabric. Every group invents new strategies, elaborate hiding spots, coded language, have you seen my oregano, and a collective agreement that, if all else fails, you are just here for the vibes. The festival ends with a mass exodus, everyone shuffling toward the parking lot, slightly sunburned and still wary of compost piles. On the way out, you spot a police car idling at the gate. The officer inside is half asleep, tapping his fingers to the rhythm of the music still drifting through the night. You pass by without incident, the taste of incense and uncertainty lingering in the air. As you leave, you realise the summer of love was also the summer of looking over your shoulder, a time when even peace, love and granola came with a side of gentle paranoia. And as you brush the last bits of tie-dye dust from your shoes, you wonder, was it all worth it? Of course. But maybe next time you'll stick to the lemonade, pulp and all. It's the 1980s, and the war on drugs means business. You're sipping instant coffee in your suburban kitchen when the sound of whirring blades drowns out the morning birds. The DEA is flying low, searching for illicit plants with all the subtlety of a rock concert. You duck, hoping they don't mistake your mint patch for the next big bust. You peek out the window and see your neighbour, Mr. Jenkins, flattening himself against the side of his garage, garden hose in hand, as if he's auditioning for a role in a spy movie. Across the street, Mrs. Delaney nervously prunes her rose bushes, glancing skyward every few seconds like a woman expecting an air raid. The whir of helicopter blades is relentless, shaking the windows and sending every dog in a 3-block radius into a patriotic barking frenzy. In the backyard, your modest garden sits in the crosshairs of paranoia. You eye your tomatoes, Basil, and that suspiciously robust patch of mint, suddenly aware that green thumb has taken on a new, more incriminating meaning. You wonder if you should have skipped that episode of Miami Vice last night. Now you're positive the DEA is using thermal imaging to track suspiciously enthusiastic gardeners. On the evening news, the anchors are serious. Major bust today, they announce, as helicopters zoom across the skyline behind them. The reporter interviews a neighbour who swears she always suspected the Joneses' backyard was up to something. The next day, the paper features a front-page photo of a wilted cannabis plant lying next to a pair of handcuffs and a garden gnome. Headline blaring, "Busted in the burbs, the war hits home." You start to see undercover agents everywhere. Is that a mailman or a DEA operative? Is the meter reader really checking the water bill or searching for evidence of illegal irrigation? The local hardware store starts selling innocent flour mix with a guarantee that not a single seed is questionable. Neighbourhood block parties become tense affairs, with everyone showing off their gardening prowess and subtly checking each other's planters for telltale leaves. The government launches a new campaign, "Just Say No" to suspicious shrubs. Schools hand out flyers listing plants of concern, and you catch your child staring at the houseplants with new suspicion. The class hamster is even renamed Sergeant Squeakers in honour of the national crackdown. You find yourself explaining to your 7-year-old that oregano is a pizza topping, not a federal offence. Your own anxiety ramps up every time the helicopter circles. You become an expert in camouflage gardening, planting sunflowers as a privacy screen and surrounding your mint with marigolds. You debate writing "It's mint, I swear" on a sign, but worry it would only draw more attention. Your neighbour starts covering his herb garden with a tarp, which ironically looks even more suspicious. The best stories come from the neighbourhood gossip chain. A distant cousin who flushed an entire backyard garden at the sound of approaching sirens. A family who invited the DEA in for lemonade, only to be complimented on their impressive rhododendrons. The local PTA holds a gardening for safety seminar with tips on how to avoid accidental criminality by sticking to petunias and, if in doubt, astroturf. By summer's end, your garden is less bountiful but far less exciting to federal agents. The helicopters move on, chasing rumours of suburban cartels and renegade botanists in other zip codes. You breathe a little easier, though you still jump at the sound of a weed whacker. You finish your coffee, gaze out over your peaceful and legally compliant backyard, and marvel at the absurdity of a world where mint could be mistaken for menace, and every gardener lives one whirring helicopter away from infamy. You water your tomatoes, wave at the sky, and hope tomorrow brings nothing more alarming than a squirrel in the bird bath. It's the early 20th century, and you're nibbling on a hashish candy you picked up at the corner pharmacy. Fast forward to the 1970s, and now your friend Dave is handing you a mysterious brownie at a party. The taste? Questionable. The legality? Also questionable. The effects? Well, you won't be finishing that crossword anytime soon. You look down at the wrapper in your hand, faded print, curly letters, and a promise that hashish bonbons will soothe nerves, restore vitality, and maybe even make Aunt Clara's bridge club less unbearable. The pharmacist smiles, slides a handful across the counter, and assures you that one is plenty. You believe him mostly. Back then, nobody bats an eye at cannabis candy after all it's sold, alongside licorice, laudanum, and cough syrup that would probably get its own episode of Cops today. The taste is earthy, a little spicy, and coated in enough sugar to disguise almost anything. You pop one in your mouth, feel a gentle calm, and tackle your daily chores with a new sense of curiosity about the family clock and the wallpaper patterns. Edibles in the old days were medicine, a little treat for anxiety, sleeplessness, and female complaints. Grandma kept a tin on the smell wafting out the door is unmistakable. Chocolate, burnt sugar, and a whiff of mischief. Dave grins, hands you a brownie the size of a paperback novel and says, "Careful, they're strong." You ask how strong. He shrugs. Well, I lost track of the recipe somewhere between the Rolling Stones record and the phone call from my mum. You take a bite. The texture is gritty, the flavour somewhere between garden soil and fudge, but the atmosphere is electric. At this party, the brownies are an event in themselves. People trade stories about their wildest bake sale mishaps. One girl claims she met her spirit animal in the laundry room. Another swears she solved a math problem that had baffled her since 6th grade. If only she could remember what it was. The legality of the whole thing is a running joke. Dave keeps the pan hidden behind the detergent, and everyone swears up and down that it's just regular chocolate when the landlord knocks. You know better. By the time you're halfway through your second bite, you're deeply invested in the existential journey of a potted fern in the corner. The beauty of edibles is also their danger. Too little, and you wonder what all the fuss is about. Too much, and you're contemplating the meaning of shoelaces for the better part of an afternoon. At some point you realise you've been staring at the same crossword clue for 20 minutes, convinced the answer is peanut butter. It is not. By the 21st century, edibles have come full circle, legal in some states, gourmet in others, and packaged with warning labels longer than a credit card statement. There are gummies, truffles, sodas, and, yes, those brownies now in bite-sized, dose-controlled pieces. The taste is better, the effects more predictable, and the packaging so colourful you're tempted to eat 3 just for the fun of it. Modern dispensaries boast chef-curated menus and microdosing for mindful living. You remember Dave, who would have rolled his eyes and added sprinkles. Yet some things never change. Edibles are still a gamble, still a secret shared with friends, still a punchline at family reunions. Don't eat the mystery cookies. You marvel at how something so old-fashioned could become so controversial, then so ordinary again. You finish your treat, set aside your crossword, and drift off into a gentle haze, thankful that, in the grand journey from apothecary to bake sale, a little sweetness and a lot of caution goes a very long way. It's the 2020s, and marijuana has gone from contraband to craft. You walk into a dispensary that looks like an Apple store for the slightly confused. Every product has branding, flavor notes, and a price tag that could finance a small vacation. Somewhere, an old-timey prohibitionist is spinning in his grave and probably wishing he'd bought stock. You pause at the automatic doors, greeted by an aroma somewhere between lemon zest and, well, money. Inside, glass cases gleam under LED lights, staffed by bud tenders in matching polos, each sporting the serene smile of someone who can explain terpenes and upsell you a $35 pre-roll. You spot a digital menu on the wall, listing strains with names that sound like indie rock bands: Crystal Sunrise, Naptime Jungle, Velvet Raccoon. Under each one, tasting notes: earthy with hints of passion fruit, peppery finish, lingering nostalgia for your college roommate's couch. Gone are the days of secret handshakes and whispered code words. Now it's all loyalty points, branded merchandise, and meticulously designed packaging. You can buy flour in a recyclable tin, chocolates in minimalist cubes, and a tiny bottle of CBD wellness elixir that promises relaxation, focus, or a deeper appreciation of indoor plants. The staff hands you a laminated card to help you decide. What vibe are you looking for today? You're not sure, but affordability is suspiciously absent from the list. Your wallet aches as you browse the edibles. Each one is artisanal, locally sourced, and gluten-sensitive, because nothing says counterculture like an ingredients list longer than a phone contract. You overhear a couple debating between microdose tranquility chews and a sativa-forward jelly square. The bud tender leans in, voice low and reverent. This one pairs beautifully with a Wednesday afternoon and light jazz. You try to remember when weed got its own sommelier. In the corner, there's a wall of vape pens that look like they were designed by NASA. Some have Bluetooth, others have customizable LED lights, and come with an app so you can track your personal elevation journey. You think of your great-uncle, who used to roll joints with a receipt and a prayer, and you wonder what he'd make of all this innovation. He'd probably ask about the rewards program. Prices hover somewhere between splurge and second mortgage. The daily special is a single hand-rolled joint for the price of a steak dinner. No sides. There are tiered discounts, first-time buyer perks, and a friendly reminder that all purchases come with government sales tax and a sticker reading, "This is not a toy." You leave the store with a tiny bag that feels suspiciously light, a branded sticker, and the realization that you've just spent more on 1 gram of weed than you did on your first cell phone. Outside, you join a line of other customers comparing notes about terpenes, favourite bud tenders, and which local bakery pairs best with Dreamy Sunday OG. You realise weed has become a lifestyle, a subscription, an aesthetic. There are weed yoga classes, weed dinner parties, weed-themed wellness retreats. The only thing missing is a weed podcast hosted by your mum, and give it time. Of course, the real punchline is that, for all the gloss and polish, the experience hasn't changed that much. People are still looking for a little relaxation, a little connection, a little break from the news cycle. Only now you can do it with the full confidence of a loyalty club member, a phone app, and a perfectly legal receipt. You walk home, bag in hand, smiling at the thought that somewhere the ghosts of anxious lawmakers and jazz musicians are sharing a laugh. Weed, once a villain, is now a boutique industry, outlawed, then overpriced, and finally just another way to unwind after a long day of being human. So tonight, as you sink into your clean bed, one with no hidden tax stamps, suspicious backyard plants, or government agents disguised as gardeners, take a moment to appreciate just how far we've come. You're living in a world where your cough syrup doesn't double as a federal offence, where your neighbour's tomato patch is just a tomato patch, and where jazz musicians can play a late set without anyone blaming the trumpet for moral decline. Think about the absurdities we've wandered through together. Farmers who grew hemp for victory, only to be called criminals the next season. Doctors who prescribed cannabis for everything from toothaches to nervous conditions, only to later deny they'd ever heard of the stuff. Lawmakers convinced that a single puff could turn anyone into a jazz-crazed outlaw, and an entire nation that once saw weed as a miracle, a menace, and now, sometimes, just an overpriced baggie in a boutique shop. But beneath all the paranoia, propaganda, and panic, there's always been resilience. People adapt, protest, laugh, and occasionally change the rules, even if it takes 100 years and more than a few bad PSA films. The story of how America criminalized weed isn't just about plants or politics. It's about our remarkable talent for taking something ordinary and making it weird, dramatic, and, eventually, hilarious. So as you drift off tonight, maybe send a silent thank you to everyone who kept going, whether they were hemp farmers, jazz musicians, accidental activists, or just someone trying to make sense of a very strange law. Because history proves that people are stubborn, hopeful, and yes, a little ridiculous. Rest easy, knowing that whatever chaos history throws your way, you're safe, warm, and only at risk of a midnight snack attack, not a midnight federal raid. Good night, and I'll see you in the next story.